for a further larger ground incursion. Just before I go, I want to show you the live pictures from New York, the UN, because we are waiting to hear from the UN Secretary General. We expect that in the next few minutes, so do stay with us on BBC News. We'll bring that to you live here. But thanks for watching Verified Live. See you next time.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Israel says its ground forces have made raids into Gaza as Palestinians flee in cars and on foot after a warning to leave areas in the north within 24 hours. It comes as the UN warns the order to move around 1 million people is impossible to achieve. And US Secretary of State Antony Blinken confirms the US is in talks to establish safe areas in Gaza as he wraps up meetings in Qatar.
We discussed with the Israelis, urged the Israelis to use every possible precaution to avoid harm to civilians.
Hello to you, I'm Ben Thompson. This is the Daily Global. The Israeli army says it is conducting localised raids inside Gaza ahead of an expected ground offensive on the densely populated Palestinian territory. It comes as thousands of Palestinians remain on the move after being told to leave northern Gaza by midnight, that is just 4 hours' time. All day civilians have been fleeing by car, on the back of trucks and on foot. There have already been several days of airstrikes on Gaza, which have killed around 1,500 Palestinians. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News. Now let's have a look at some of the other stories that are making news today. And Australia's Prime Minister has made his final appeal for the country to vote in favour of recognising Indigenous people in the Constitution. A day before a landmark referendum, Anthony Albanese urged Australians to show generosity of spirit. He said kindness costs nothing. Opinion polls suggest the government's proposal will be rejected. Reports say China has sent a large number of North Korean defectors back to the country against their will. Human rights activists claim at least 600 North Koreans could face jail, torture or execution upon their return. South Korea didn't confirm the numbers but believe the reports are accurate. China says they don't recognise the defectors as refugees. And Microsoft's revised offer to buy Call of Duty maker Activision Blizzard has been given the green light by regulators. Despite the competition watchdog approving the takeover, it criticised the company for wasting time and failing to mend the agreement sooner. It is a $69 billion deal. You are live with BBC News. Now, there are fears that a new front could open in this war if the Islamist group Hezbollah becomes involved and attacks Israel in support of its Palestinian allies. Well, the group's deputy leader has told a rally in Lebanon that they were fully prepared to join Hamas when the time comes. Anna Foster sends us this report now from the Israel-Lebanon border. It's really good to have you with us, John Alterman. Thank you. It's really great to get your insight into this. But for now, thank you.
Thank you.
So just worth pointing out at this stage, we are expecting an update from the United Nations. The Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, expected to address some of the concerns about the response from the international community, whether international allies are doing enough to avoid a humanitarian crisis. So we will stay right across that, and if there are any further developments, we will take you there live. Also worth pointing out, of course, the BBC Live page is where you will get all the latest developments. Stay with us here on BBC News. Hello, you're watching BBC News. I want to take you straight to New York now. This is a scene at the UN where Israel's ambassador to the UN is holding a briefing. He's appearing alongside the families of some of those who've been held hostage by Hamas. Now, we are, as I said, expecting to hear also from the UN's Secretary General, and we're also coming ahead of a UN Security Council meeting on the conflict. Let's just listen into this press briefing. Well, there, the US ambassador to the UN also speaking at this event. As I said, we're expecting in the week. We will follow events there very closely and take you back there should there be any further developments. But let's focus on events of last Saturday. That was when Hamas, which is designated a terror organisation by many Western governments, including the UK, murdered hundreds of young people at the Supernova music festival that was underway in southern Israel. According to some accounts, there were around 4,000 people attending the event. Well, among them was Shai Weinstein. He's a photographer and documented his and his friends' terrifying experiences over the weekend. He joins me now from Netanya. Shai, thank you for joining us here on BBC News. And talk to me about that event. Just start at the beginning for us, if you will. You went to the music festival, you bought a last-minute ticket, you weren't even planning to be there. Give me a sense of when you first thought things weren't right. We have continued coverage for you here on the BBC, but around the world and across the UK. This is BBC News. Welcome back. You are live with BBC News. We have continuing coverage of events in the Middle East as that conflict escalates. Let's talk now to Jeremy Konyndyk, who is the president of Refugee International. It's an independent global humanitarian organisation. Before joining Refugees International, Jeremy served in the Biden administration as USAID's lead official for COVID-19. Thank you for being with us, Jeremy. And I want to talk particularly about that evacuation that is going on right now. There are just maybe 3 hours until that deadline for more than 1 million people to leave the northern part of the Gaza Strip. Is it even remotely possible that everybody who wants to leave can leave? So that the team at BBC Verify looking at some of the logistics that may be involved in that evacuation order that does officially expire within the next 3 hours. So we'll stay right across those developments for you. Also worth just reminding you of that story that's been developing over the course of the last hour. News from the Israeli Air Force saying that they have carried out what they're describing as local raids in the territory of the Gaza Strip. There are very few details about where that is, but there's an expectation that they may want to try and destroy some of Hamas's operations, particularly ahead of that much anticipated ground incursion. They also say they've been trying to locate missing persons. A reminder, the BBC Live page has all the details, everything you need to know for the latest developments on what has been a very busy day. Much more there, bbc.com/news. Headlines coming up for you very shortly. See you then. Bye-bye.
Hello there, let's take a look at the world weather forecast over the next day or so. We'll begin in North America where the rain is dry and it's settled, as you can see from the outlook.
Across India, at least 60 people have taken their own lives after being abused and blackmailed by loan apps. BBC Eye Investigations goes undercover to reveal the scam that's plaguing India. And to expose the people making money from misery, fear and shame.
基本上你可以正常理解他的在我面前是裸体的。
Live from London, this is BBC News. Israel says its ground forces have made raids into Gaza as Palestinians flee after a warning to leave areas in the north within 24 hours. It comes as the UN warns that the order to move around 1 million people is impossible to achieve. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken confirms the US is in talks to establish safe areas in Gaza as he holds meeting in Qatar and Bahrain.
Urge the Israelis to use every possible precaution to avoid harm to civilians.
Hello to you, I'm Ben Thompson. This is the Daily Global, where we're focusing on events and the conflict in the Middle East. And that is where we begin because the Israeli army says it is conducting localised raids inside Gaza ahead of an expected ground offensive. Thousands of Palestinians remain on the move after being told to leave northern Gaza by midnight. That is just 2 hours' time. Yeah, and also I think, yes, Jason, we may have lost the line to you, but as you would expect, we will cover all sides of this. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for using the facilities that you have right now to be able to talk to us. We do wish you well. That is Jason there joining us, just having moved, Jason Shower, who has just moved to 10 kilometres outside of Gaza City, now around the world and across the UK. You're watching BBC News. Now let's have a look at some of the other stories related to events in the Middle East. And the UK says it will send 2 Royal Navy ships and a surveillance aircraft to the eastern Mediterranean in plans to bolster security. The aircraft will begin patrols on Friday to track threats to regional stability, such as the transfer
Need
of
your
weapons
fix of
to
the beautiful
terror
game?
groups.
Then head to the
3
BBC
Merlin
Sport
helicopters
website and
and
app
Royal
for live
Marines are
updates and
also
social
being
media from
dispatched.
Premier League and Champions League games.
In Brighton,
with
a
gossip,
22-year-old
goal
woman
alerts,
has been
quizzes,
arrested
score
on
predictors, team
suspicion of
selectors and top
supporting Hamas at a
punditry. Go online
demonstration.
or
The
download
group
the
has
app
been
now.
declared a terrorist organisation in the UK. Hamas members or those who are
This
found
weekend,
guilty of
Australians
inviting
go to
support
the
for the
polls
group
in a
can be
historic
jailed for up to
referendum
14
on whether or not
years.
to recognise Indigenous
And the
people in the
Metropolitan Police says that
Constitution
London
and give
has
them a
seen
voice.
a massive increase
It's being
in
sold
reports
as
of
a way to
anti-Semitism since the
reconciliation,
conflict
but it's been a
erupted.
bitter
In the past 2
campaign.
weeks, there have been
So which way will
180
Australians
offences
vote?
and
More,
incidents,
join me
compared
on
with
BBC
26 in the same period last year. The Prime Minister's called the rise disgusting, adding extra funding had been given to protect Jewish institutions. More on those stories on the BBC website. Now you are live with BBC News. Now let's take you to Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Cornicus, who's Israel Defence Forces International spokesperson. Thank you for being with us on the programme. We've been reporting reports tonight that you have begun, Israeli forces have begun localised raids in the territory of the Gaza Strip. What does that mean? What is a localised raid?
Usually come with a military benefit because we are the enemy of what we're doing.
Okay, it's good to talk to you. Thank you for being with us on the programme. That's Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Cornicus from Israel Defence Force. Thank you. Stay with us here on BBC News.
Hello there. Let's take a look at the weather forecast for Europe as we head through the next few days.
Hello there, good evening. Well, Friday was another day of
very
contrast
deep area
across
of
the
low
UK with
pressure
outbreaks
across
of rain
Scandinavia,
across much
some
of the
wet
southern
and
half of
very
England.
Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.
I've never felt poorer than I do right now.
People have sleepless nights with this stuff.
People who don't own homes
are carrying the can.
Panorama, the big mortgage squeeze. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
This is BBC News. These are the headlines. Israel says its soldiers have carried out localised raids in Gaza as a deadline approaches for Palestinians to move before an expected ground offensive. It comes as the UN warns that the order to move around 1 million people in 24 hours is impossible to achieve. The Scottish First Minister Hunza Yousaf speaks to the BBC about his fears for his mother-in-law and family in Gaza and the extent of Israeli action.
Nobody has said that Israel does not have the right to protect itself from terror. All of us have said that, myself.
But they're going too far.
Included. But collective punishment cannot be justified. Yes, they are going too far.
Now let's return to that story that we brought you within the last hour. News that the Israeli army says it is conducting localised raids inside Gaza. That is ahead of an expected ground offensive. Well, thousands of Palestinians remain on the move tonight after being told to leave northern Gaza by midnight. That is less than 3 hours from now. Michael, it's good to have your insight. Thank you for joining us. That's Michael Link there, joining us from Ontario in Canada. Thank you. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News.
Bringing you different stories from across the UK.
All residents have learning disabilities or autism. It's not easy to
Concord
recruit
was known
because
to startle
retail
the
and
communities
NHS
it flew
jobs
over,
generally
and
pay
even
more.
smash windows of skyscrapers as the famous sonic boom reverberated from the aircraft down to ground level. But what exactly causes the sonic boom in the first place?
Supporting them to live the best life ever.
The government has put an extra £2.4 billion into social care, but it's only enough to match the increase in inflation.
Care worker pay is a really big issue. It's an issue that the Local Government Association has lobbied hard on. And to make a step change is difficult. It needs funding to councils to increase. And of course it needs to increase in a way that it gets through to the care worker pay.
Many at the summit believe better wages won't solve everything, but care organisations like Karen's say if staff were rewarded for what they do, there'd be more personalised help to go around.
For more
Original
stories
global
from across
stories
the UK,
from the
head to
BBC.
the BBC News website.
Welcome back. You're live with BBC News. Now, another line of breaking news to bring you this hour, and it's news that France has raised its security alerts to the highest level possible. That's after an attack in a school that killed a teacher and injured 3 other people earlier on Friday. That was in the city of Arras in northern France. Well, the emergency level will mean that France will now operate at maximum vigilance and protection in the event of an imminent threat of a terrorist attack or in the immediate aftermath of one. Emergency measures for police forces to intervene on potential suspects are also now in place, as well as access to alert the population in case there is the imminent threat of an attack. So just confirmation there, France raising its security level to the highest level possible. So that's Barbara Woodward there speaking. She's the UK's permanent representative to the United Nations. So worth just taking you back there for that update, given all events and the fast-moving events that we've had throughout the evening. It's also worth reminding you too that we've heard from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying that this latest is just the beginning. We've got some indication of small localised raids in Gaza. We've heard from the Israeli Prime Minister saying this was just the beginning. We are striking our enemies, he says, with unprecedented might. He says, I want to emphasise that this is only the beginning. So it has been a significant day of developments, given that in just over 2 hours' time, we expect that deadline that has been given to people in the north of Gaza to evacuate to the south, an expectation that more than 1 million people will be asked to make that move. We've been hearing throughout the programme about the infrastructure that is simply not in place. The UN has condemned that demand. They say that this is a death sentence for the vulnerable. They've talked about attacks on healthcare. They're also calling for a release of hostages, but how to protect civilians, and that is the crucial thing in all of this. They've said that it is simply so difficult. The health system at breaking point. They say that aid is locked out, and they've described this as pushing people into the abyss. So that the latest from the UN there. We also heard, as you saw a little earlier, from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres talking about the rules of war. He says humanitarian law and human rights law must be respected and upheld. All hostages, he says, in Gaza must be released immediately. He said that hatred around the world has been stoked by this terrible conflict. He's called on leaders around the world to speak out against anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim bigotry and hate speech of all kinds. Remember, there is continued coverage on the BBC website. Christian will be here with the context for you in just a few moments. Stay with us here on BBC News.
Much more than a holiday. It's about seeing the world through fresh eyes,
exploring new destinations and cultures, and creating memories that
when
will
the weather can't make up its mind.
That's why the Travel Show, we're expanding
we can help you make up
too.
yours.
And wherever we go, we want you to come with us.
Check on BBC
now, that might
Weather.
Make for an awful lot of excess baggage, but we think you're worth it.
The Travel Show, tomorrow at 2:30 on BBC News and iPlayer.
Hello, I'm Christian Fraser, and this is The Context.
The Israelis were telling them that they were going to issue an evacuation order effectively for everybody north of the Wadi Gaza area, that's about halfway down the Gaza Strip, to move south, and that they had 24 hours to do so. The Israelis say for their own protection.
These severely ill people whose injuries mean their only chances of survival is being on a life support such as mechanical ventilators. So moving those people is a death sentence.
Called on everybody to evacuate because that's the right thing to do. We are going to commence significant military activities. It's going to be an active combat zone. We're going to strike Hamas targets, and we don't want civilian casualties.
Discuss with the Israelis and urge the Israelis to use every possible precaution to avoid harm to civilians.
The Israeli army has mounted the first raids into northern Gaza to dismantle and disrupt Hamas's ability to fire rockets, but the bigger incursion is pending. Israel has given the Palestinians 24 hours to evacuate 1 million people from northern Gaza before the expanded operation begins. One hospital, Al Auda, to the south of Gaza City, has been told tonight it has 2 hours left to evacuate. The doctors are still treating the wounded. We'll be live in Jerusalem this evening with our international editor, Jeremy Bowen, and we'll have the latest from our correspondent, Anna Foster, who's on the northern border with Lebanon, where concerns are growing that Hezbollah might soon enter the war. Both sides have today exchanged fire, with a Reuters cameraman killed in the confusion. Good evening. What would you take with you if you were told to evacuate your home in 24 hours, knowing that soon after it may well be demolished? 1.1 million Palestinians woke to that reality today